In this streaming I will show you how can oh fuck, this is a giocatore di 2000. Oh Maria Santa, ho già giocato con questo. Oh Maria Santa, oh no no no, e ho fatto la patta. Continuazione di questa mossa qua. Oi oi oi. Non conosco veramente. Oi oi oi, questo è 2000 ragazzi. Ai ai ai. Oh. Dove fare la pressione? Questo è il problema. Ma adesso? Cosa faccio adesso? Questa ragazzi ma ha già fatto una patta, ma è forte, più forte di me. Cioè 2000 di rating, cazzo. Oh, cioè abbiamo la difesa per difendere questo, sì. Abbiamo e non abbiamo, questo è il problema. Non abbiamo. Possiamo difendere? No. Quasi no. Possiamo difendere così perché col cavallo la può cacciare via. E lui ha solo da venire qua. So che bisogna aprirlo. Non so come, ma so che bisogna... La devo aprire. Mamma mia. Aspetto suggestioni per vincere. Non ce la faccio a vincere. Veloce. Con aiuti. Le suggestioni si possono avere, ok? Cosa ha trovato lei schifoloso? Di cacca. Dopo recupero il pezzo con quello lì. Però non so se vale la pena, se questa è la mossa. Non mi intendo. Ho fatto blunder il cavallo, mamma mia. Che stupido sono. Forse non sono stupido. Ho fatto un blunder quasi... Adesso lui cosa minaccia? Il mio alfiere. E dopo qua? E il pedone, resto niente. Io potrei fare questa mossa e difendere quasi tutto. Però lui dopo può venire con la torre qui. Così non può venire con la torre. Aspetto le suggestioni, ragazzi. Se no, come facciamo? Ma comunque perdo per via del tempo, non c'ho tempo. Scacco vuole, scacco qua. Oh, fuck. Che mossa ha trovato? Che mossa ha trovato? Quanto schifoloso può essere questo? Che mossa che ha trovato? Devo scappare, scacco. Faccio qua scacco. Intanto, per capire un po' il suo discorso. E adesso anche se fa lo scacco non mi interessa tanto. Oh, ok. Adesso se li faccio qua scacco, Ai ai ai, c'è il cavallo. Se non c'aveva il cavallo, avrei fatto prima questo. Però comunque la devo fare. Cioè questa mossa la devo... Intanto lui avrà un scacco. No, intanto però dopo mi prende l'alfiere. No. Però dopo lui c'ha queste mosse qua che mi può sacrificare, mi può rovinare. No, non c'è niente, dai. Li prendo con... Intanto li prendo la torre. Meglio così, faccio così. E lui che fa lo scacco. Le ho offerto la patta perché ho paura di lui. Perché so che perdo. Anche... Oh, fuck. Se viene qua, vado di qua. Oh, fuck. 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 Scacco matto adesso. Se lui viene di qua, scacco, io vado di qua e basta. Non penso che prendo matto. Sì che prendo matto qua. Se mi dava un po' di tempo avrei vinto perché ho due pedoni, due punti sopra, due pedoni, ma non ho tempo. La prossima volta col bianco vinco. Cosa ci pensi? Non c'è niente, vado di qua e basta. Cosa c'è così da pensare? Se avrebbe avuto questa mossa, era scaccomato dopo. Non ce l'ha. Oh, forse ce la faccio. Ce la faccio con questo. Ce la faccio con questo. Forse sì. Forse sì. C'ho due cose. Almeno sono riuscito a far stalemate, ragazzi. Meglio di niente. Rematch. Non può vincere contro di me, vedete? Ciao Tent, ciao. Così dopo apri traiettoria, sì, però non c'avevo tempo, non ce l'avrei fatto. Comunque, questo giocatore abbiamo fatto una patta, è molto forte, ragazzi. Cioè, questo è un oltre 2000. Ragazzi, oltre 2000. Cioè, è fortissimo questo. Cioè, questa spacca, eh. Ragazzi, 2000, 2000, 2000 di giù. Aspetta, vediamo adesso. Oltre 2000, vediamo con che precisione ha giocato. Quindi come vedete, non so se si vede qua, io ho giocato con lui due partite, una abbiamo concluso una patta, la seconda abbiamo fatto adesso stalemate, perché io non avevo tempo, io comunque gli avrei dato questo pedone per fare una patta. Boh, adesso non ha giocato, ha fatto 7 blunder, 2 sbagli. Però comunque è forte, ragazzi. Vediamo la partita. Se avevo tempo avrei vinto. Però avete visto che non ha accettato di giocare di nuovo con me. C'ha paura. Qua è sbaglio. Avrei dovuto andare con questo davanti. Se lui veniva qua, io avrei preso. Io avrei dovuto cioè, prendere. Qui ho sbagliato. Qui avrei dovuto andare qua. Di nuovo sbaglio. Ah, fare lo scacco prima. Puttana Eva. Ragazzi, ce l'avevo. Guardate che mossa di computer qua. Ok? Se io avrei visto questa, scacco, lui avrebbe dovuto mettere questa. Io avrei preso, lui prendeva, scacco, va di qua, un pedone e dopo una torre ed era fottuto 4.2, non c'era più niente di lui. Per questa lui non ha giocato più come. Ah, ho capito. Ai 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 ai. L'avrei massacrato. Ah, avete visto? Per questo ragazzi, facciamo un'altra partita. Lui, peccato che non voleva giocare quello lì ancora una partita bella. Russia, 4 anni fa, gioca solo. Vediamo se riusciamo a vincere contro l'orco. Non lo so, questa continuazione French Defense, non so come si gioca o come cazzo si chiama. Non lo so come giocare questa. Non lo so, però vincerò sicuro se presterò attenzione. Oh, ok, lo sapevo, ha trovato la mossa. Il problema è che lui è rock. Dopo di questa lui è rock. Non vedo ora di rifarmi il rating, di arrivare almeno a 1900. Minaccia questo. Ah, boh. Oh, Rossacchiotto. Oh, ah, che stai facendo? Oh, cosa vuole fare? Intrappolarmi? Oh, adesso vince questo pedone. Gli avrebbe piaciuto di vincere questo pedone, ma non vince. Perché c'è la donna qua. Ratatà, ratatà. Se vinco ancora 2 partite, arrivo, faccio il mio rating da... e basta. Oh no, non ce l'ha niente, non ce l'ha niente, non ce l'ha dopo. Spingiamo questo forse. Il cavallo bisogna andare di qua. E dopo? No. Il cavallo andrà di qua, di qua, di qua, di qua e di qua. Quindi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 mosse e la distruggo, ragazzi. Se il mio cavallo arriva qua, è fottutissimo. È fottutissimo. Tararam. Quindi, come ho detto qua, 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 qua. E dopo là. Ok. Quindi partiamo con la cavalleria verso il qua, qua e qua. Ok, quindi vuole prendere questo. Dice, ma cosa? Ah, vuole attacca da due. Eh, 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 eh. Adesso ho capito. Boh. Adesso ho capito che vuole venire qua. Ok. Questa non possiamo permetterci di, di perdere perché questa è una... Oh, wow, wow, wow. Non abbiamo più nessuna vantaggi. E dopo solo perdiamo e non abbiamo nessun avvantaggio. Oh. Poi arriva con l'attore, vabbè. Va bene, va bene, va bene. Va bene, dai. Divertiti. Ma ha fatto lo sacchiotto. Quindi il mio piano col cavallo ma l'ha rovinato. Dopo c'è un scacco qua. Ma ciao Daniel, ma ciao. Ra 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 ra. Questa mi vuole massacrare adesso. gli faccio la patta. Se vuole accettare la patta. Non accetta neanche morto. Lo Scacchiotto preferisce morire che accettare la patta. Non fa niente. Ma no, ma puttana Eva. Ma che cazzo sono... Ma vaffanculo. Come cazzo sono riuscito a fare quella un cazzo di me? Mamma mia, puttana Eva. C'è Carstens vs Neyman ora. Davvero? Su Parigi? C'è adesso? Chess.com, vero? Chess.com Live.
As Magnus figures it out, let's take a trip into the chess here a little bit, and let me ask you. One of the things you and I often get into once we start seeing the moves made on the board is who's going to drive the roads toward opening theory, or who has the interest in avoiding some of the main lines and getting into that dark, murky woods that can be a complicated middle game as soon as possible, right? So from a match strategy point of view, as you put yourself in the head of both of these players, your thoughts on, maybe start with Hans, what Hans might want to accomplish in the first stage of the game in regards to opening prep.
Well, if we take it back to 2022, what he said, he understood that Magnus might play some offbeat lines, as Magnus is known to do, and he caught him. So if we see something like that, where Magnus is trying to avoid theory, but playing perhaps not the openings with the most teeth, they lack bite, they're just kind of wavering around, then perhaps Hans feels like his confidence, his stride will take him the rest of the way.
At the same time, I mean, this is something Magnus does against everyone, right? Like, obviously, Hans caught him as black in that very now infamous game, right? And in that obscure kind of Catalan. But Magnus specializes in making people feel uncomfortable, right? And one game probably doesn't change his strategy if he does feel like against his opponent, he'd rather get roads less traveled.
It's true. I mean, Magnus is the king of just getting any position and winning them no matter what the evaluation is. It could say it's dead equal, there's no life here, and yet Magnus is able to squeeze the life out of his opponent, just make them suffer, make them struggle move after move. But if there's somebody who feels like they've struggled and suffered more than anyone, it's Hans, and he's spoken quite loudly about it. He's been in that interview room with
c'è Hans Niemann. Hans non è molto convinto. Ragazzi, adesso giochiamo, vediamo Hans Niemann. Non è molto convinto Niemann. Ma ce-a din nou, m-a preso. Hans Niemann. All for a draw.
Been traded, as you said. It's not very common you get a position like this. And on that note, the tension is finally broken. You can cut it with a knife. C takes D5. Maybe getting a rook to the C file quickly is Magnus's plan, right? You've got a knight on C6 in front of the C pawn, and indeed he does it. There's also a quick plan to highlight, either via rook C2 or the queen moving up. Sometimes white will try to go for a battery on the long diagonal in these positions. You guard the E pawn, the queen comes to A1. There's tactics on the diagonal and pressure on the knight on C6. Little funky.
Definitely funky. And for black, you often want to put a rook on C8, but not so easy because this bishop can jump out to a new diagonal and hit that rook when it lands there. But Danny, you called it. Rook C2, Queen A1 potentially in the near future.
It could be a bad sign for Magnus that I just called the entire plan. Rook C1, Rook C2. That's probably not the level of chess he's looking for today, Danny Rich style. But it is a common plan in the structure, jokes aside. The queen battery will be dangerous. And the fun thing about it next is that if that E2 pawn isn't targeted, Robert, the E rook can also come to C1. And so you have this almost like Sicilian-style structure for white, right, with the open C file. And in fact, the knight gets out of the way so that black can avoid this battery that's coming and maybe play pawn to C6 or C5.
That's a really strong move. Retreating moves with the knight are especially difficult to find. Hans backs up to go forward to D7 next to reinforce this knight on F6. And then the queen will get active after that because it's no longer tending to that knight on the king side. So I really like the way that Hans has played thus far. And I think he should be building confidence because he's handled the opening stage of this first game very well.
Seems to be confident. Lean back in his chair a little bit. Giving Magnus something to think about here as Magnus uses a little bit of the extra time he had to decide where to go. Does he follow through with the battery plan, the queen coming to A1? Does he look to do something different now that Hans has relocated this knight, as you said, a very strong idea?
Preempted it. And for Hans, he's now catching up on the clock as Magnus continues to think, trying to come up with perhaps a new plan. But Queen A1 was the idea. It just doesn't have great effect anymore. And for Magnus, I'm actually not really seeing it. He is very passive in his position. All of his pieces on his own first three ranks. That's typically not what we recommend in chess. And he's trying to let his pieces lead the way, but we do typically like having our pawns, because this pawn on D5, for example, I'll change the color to blue, it restricts the bishop on G2's axis. Instead, Danny, we see Queen C1 inviting C6.
Queen C1 invites C6, and it's awkward because you wonder where's the queen going next. So what does Magnus have up his sleeve? The problem when you have less space, Robert, just to highlight, is white has every single piece that they started with, besides the pawn you traded, which means they're kind of wrestling each other for squares, right? You see the cramped position of the queen, the rook, the knight, the bishop. They're all in each other's way, and black actually has more space, especially if you do get at some point to play C5 or even C6, and you can start advancing because you have the furthest center pawn on D5.
That's right, and C5 comes with an added threat, I'll put that in air quotes, of A4, just trying to chisel at white's pawn structure and create some isolated pawns. So I think that Hans has done everything right, and now he's spending time, because, Danny, there are some positions where you get tempted to lash out, and he has just done that. But rook takes C5 is not out of the question. I know you typically don't want to give up a rook for just a bishop and a pawn, but if you can control all the dark squares, that could be to white's benefit, and here goes Magnus.
Magnus sacrifices the exchange, and it cannot be underestimated how big this moment is here. One, is Magnus playing that because he felt this game getting away? And if this game gets away, you couldn't have scripted it better for Hans Niemann. Winning with black to start the match, we said the only real chance Hans Niemann has in this match is to take an early lead, put Magnus on his heels emotionally, mentally. So I know we're early, and I know that there's going to be plenty of drama and hype here. We don't need to add to it with the hyperbole, but This is a big game. Hans wins this game up the exchange, and who knows what we're in for.
Objectively, the exchange sacrifice was justified. Here, we see the bishop h3 move, but it probably came at the wrong moment. Rook b6 hits the queen. There's a pawn that was behind that queen, and this queen on a4 is dangerously close to getting trapped. It has to reroute to the center, queen to d4. But excuse me, is this pawn on b3? Can you just capture that one?
I think it's hanging. Now, Magnus will have the queen and bishop on the dark square battery for the rest of the game, and that is good old-fashioned family fun on the king side, so black has to worry about that. But again, it's an exchange and a pawn, and Magnus is in trouble here.
He is, because it's actually just an exchange. That pawn on b3 was won by Hans, so it's not enough material compensation for Magnus, not even close. And he does have that great queen and bishop lined up. Knight d2 kicks that rook back. That rook on b5, honestly, is a bit awkwardly placed. But if black gets queen b6, suddenly we see the queens leave the board, and that has to be to Hans's benefit.
Yeah, queen to b6 looks great. Magnus allows the queen trade. This is going to be super tough to hold. And Magnus doesn't even have a time advantage to go with it. Hans has plenty of time on the clock. This already looks like a game that could, if anybody around the world wasn't tuning into this match at this point, if Hans Niemann wins with black to set things in motion here in Paris on our second semifinal match of this Friday, call everybody. Call your aunt, even the one who never answers, and you don't even know if she knows how to use the internet.
Well,
This is going to break it.
this bishop on d4 is out to just be the hero in white's position. Look at it cover the b2 square. It can't be attacked very easily. A knight's about to hop out to e3. Maybe we'll see the bishop give itself up for this knight and try to win that central pawn. And rooks need open files. The c file is open, but unfortunately it's unattainable. The bishop on h3 covers that square. Rook e8 does all of nothing because the knight wants to get on e3 anyway. And Danny, that was a terrible move. The rook is trapped.
Rook is trapped. Knight to d2, and the rook has no squares. Oh my gosh, and Hans Niemann takes a brilliantly played game as black here, potentially starting off in a way that you couldn't ask for better, and just absolutely blunders with the rook on b3.
And now it's simple. You take this rook. In fact, you don't have to right yet because that rook can't go anywhere. But even if you take back, I thought the rook can slide to c1. There are all sorts of back rank checkmates against this king because the bishop's on h7. So, Danny, I hear some fire trucks or an ambulance, but I don't think they're for Hans.
Well, you had the display poster downstairs a little bit ago. This is fine. No, this is not fine anymore. Hans Niemann was in a great spot. This is no longer fine. The chessboard, the proverbial room is on fire here, and f3 is a Magnus move. Just recognizing that rook has no squares, get my king a path to enter the endgame as soon as I need to. This is looking tough. What a turnaround that move was with b5.
Tragic. You're trying to advance what could be a passed pawn. Instead, you are limiting the retreat squares from your rook. And now that rook has been captured, this bishop can even slide back to b2. Instead, he goes rook to b1, giving up a3. Yeah, he can, at any moment, play a move like bishop c5.
He wants bishop c5. Yeah, the pawns are going nowhere. And look at that bishop on h7. It's not playing. That diagonal is like looking at a brick wall on d3. I'm trying to find the way. We talk about how is the position blunderable, and I'm not seeing the way that Magnus can blunder this position. There are no tactics. There are really no weaknesses. And with Hans' clock ticking down, I think that the storyline we thought we were going to get with Hans winning as black is not going to be the case.
Yeah, the advantage was never that big, to be clear. And he did have an extra exchange. It was a sacrifice. But perhaps he can fight his way back in this one. Rook c1 hits that knight. Oh, there's this back rank checkmate problem. So I don't even know where you go here.
It's not even that the bishop isn't good. It's that the king is getting checkmated.
Oh.
He is threatening bishop takes d3. What a fun move, a creative, resourceful trick by Hans Niemann. Because if you take c7, bishop takes d3, you not only free the mate, but you might queen the b pawn. Okay, Magnus sees it, of course, and now he's headed in. Bishop c5 check will be all she wrote. There will be checkmate on e8 or not, because Hans Niemann resigns. And Magnus Carlsen strikes first, despite what was objectively a great start to the match. A good. I guess his advantage wasn't huge for Hans, but Hans was in a good spot as black there.
Yeah, Magnus missed something. He allowed that rook swing to b6 to win a pawn on b3. But you could tell Magnus, he chose violence. He chose to give up an exchange, and he went for a line that was very tricky. And here, on the other hand, we have a very calm start to game two. Hans has the white pieces. He's rerouting his pieces to the king side. This knight often hops up to g3. But Danny, we said Hans needs to get in the lead early. He's now down by 1 point, and he has to be objective. He can't start thinking about the results.
It's still early, right? He does need to get a lead early, I think, from our perspective, when we think about the match strategy and the psychology of both of these players. But you're right. Obviously, losing one game, you don't want the wheels to come off quickly against the GOAT. For the record, was that the first complete game these guys have played since September 4th, 2022? I think we should all take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that, a moment of silence for the fact that we have a complete chess game between Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann. In this case, it was the former world champion getting the dub.
He did indeed, and now with the black pieces, he's extra solid. No weaknesses, no pawn trades, just a pair of bishops off the board. And Danny, as we look at Magnus taking a drink here, do you feel like he can relax a little bit? That first game is over, as you just said, and now he can just focus on the moves on the board.
It makes you wonder, right? I mean, look, it's undeniable. Athletes talk about it all the time. You play mind tricks on yourself. You try to get yourself in the best space before kickoff of the Super Bowl, but you're really happy once that first drive is over. They all talk about it, right? So the fact that the first game is over, I think both players might be feeling a little bit better. Hans is obviously not happy that that game didn't go his way. But, yeah, I think Magnus Carlsen, to answer your question, for sure has got to be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief.
They're both locked in, staring at their computers. We saw the bishops stare at one another and then leave the board. So that's all we've seen happen is both bishops, they're gone. Now the knights will try to find some good homes in enemy territory. This knight can hop out to f5. That could actually be very dangerous with a rook sitting on e3. That rook can swing on over to hurt the black king. But that's why Magnus, sensing that there may be an impending attack on the king side, you're taught to strike in the center.
Strikes in the center to change the structure. You don't want to allow white a chance to just focus with no counterplay. I like the move rook d1, though, from Hans, especially because it was played quickly. I like that. That's a sign psychology, that mentally, that Hans, confident in this second game, not beating himself up. And I think that that is a very important thing that we should take note of early on, right? He's now up a minute on the clock as black and in a good position. I think that if you're in Hans's corner, this shows that he's currently not suffering from any hangovers of game one.
Yeah, with the white pieces here, the D file opens up. You can double in the right moment. Instead, Magnus is the one challenging for that file. And this knight coming to f5, it will be a problem at some point, but not right now because there's a problem on d1. There's already direct threats in the position. So we see the rook backtrack. Danny, I have to say, Hans is playing a nice game too. And as you said, he has a nice lead on the clock.
He's playing a nice game too, a very disciplined approach too. He tried to go for the kingside attack. Magnus opened the center. He correctly switches gears, will be the first one to grab the only open file. And if he does control the D file. Okay, interesting. I was just going to say, Magnus chooses not even to fight for the file and instead go for something a little more dynamic, but at the risk of a D6 pawn that is very weak.
It sort of has some Sicilian vibes, where this pawn is backwards. It can be attacked. But there aren't that many pieces remaining. So look at Magnus. He decides to strike. B5 takes away the C4 square. That knight was trying to venture forward and attack that D6 weakness. So I think that both sides can be happy about some elements of the position here. The D6 pawn a weakness, that's for sure. But black actually has some active play himself. A knight coming to A5 and into C4, that could be annoying.
It's funny. You highlighted Sicilian structure, but there's two bishops missing, right? No dragon bishop on the dark squares, despite the fianchetto structure, which can sometimes help to guard the D6 pawn. And no light squared bishop on E6, right? Which happens in these Najdorf structures for black. So, again, I like the dynamic choice from Magnus. I think it surprised everybody, but I still feel like Hans, especially with the time advantage, in a decent spot here as white, should keep the pressure, look for ideas of queen a3 as well. Magnus takes a passive approach rather than knight a5. What are your thoughts on that?
He's saving himself by covering the f5 square. There was rook takes d6 in the air, and if the queen took back, then knight f5 would be a check and a fork, picking up that queen. But that's what the knight on e7 is doing here. Put that in blue because it's a hero. It's covering that square a second time, and that means there are no funny business on f5.
I mean, I would pretend that I saw that tactic and set you up for it, like an assist for a dunk, but I didn't even see that. So very nice. Rook takes d6 with knight f5 check. No longer possible. Rook b6 defends both pawns.
It's a good move, right? Just trying to bring more pieces into the defense. And it might not just be defense. Later in the game, if Magnus strikes with b4, he can open up lines for his remaining pieces. So both sides have difficult decisions here. It seems like white's pieces are pretty optimally placed, but that's frustrating in chess. All your pieces on good squares. Your knight on e3 wants to hop forward but has nowhere to go. And so he makes a quiet move. King h2. Danny, what are the ideas here?
King h2 is a high-class waiting move. I like those kind of moves in these positions. You don't want to make high-class waiting moves with your pawns, everybody, because those things don't go backwards. And, okay, f3 is a good move, reinforces e4, but in general, one of the tricky parts of these equal-ish positions is you might make a pawn move that you think is harmless, Robert, and that comes back to bite you in the endgame. We see Magnus take advantage of those types of little weaknesses, squeeze water out of the stone so often. So I love that Hans is playing patiently. That's what I like about King h2. And again, f3 reinforces. I'm going to just go on a limb and say I don't think a draw is a bad result for Hans in this game. Objectively, he lost game one. He doesn't want it to get away from him. You don't want to lose 2 in a row ever, but certainly not against the GOAT. And so I think if Hans stays patient with King H2, these moves, I like how he's playing this because the draw's okay. But Magnus says, no, I'm not going to let you stay patient. Here we go.
Oh, we have fireworks now. If you take this pawn on d5, it is a pawn sacrifice, but e4 check at the right moment, but not yet. If we can analyze, if we can take a step back ever so quickly, if you got too quick, if you got greedy with the check, white can actually block your check with an attack against the queen, a fork, and then black is in huge trouble. So if we go back to the game, he did not rush. He instead blocked that d6 square with his rook, going after d5. And Danny, this is one of those positions where it can get chaotic real fast. c4 is played. If black takes it, then knight takes c4. This queen is overloaded, covering c4 and this rook on d6.
C4 tends to be explosive, and Magnus does not want the dynamite to go boom right there. But I want to point out something. This d5 pawn sack was played after Hans played f3.
Ho vinto ragazzi contro il rossacchiotto.
Look at the dark squares on the king side and highlight them for a second, because this is a...
Quindi mi devo concentrare di nuovo. Però non mi piace. Adesso preferisco guardare dopo. Chat, window capture. Non lo so, devo vedere se si vede bene, se non si vede bene. Sempre stessa apertura. Penso che questa volta la apro così. Vediamo se si vede bene su TikTok. Amici, sicuramente vetri. Si vede super. Magnus non potrebbe mai, se non fosse che deve perdere alcune partite se non lo... Ok, qua si vede bene, su YouTube adesso devo guardare. Mi sembra che questa è una mossa. Non lo so, so questa continuazione. Sì, questo. No, mi piace guardare la live di questo qua, di Scacchi, sinceramente. Vediamo come si vede adesso. Christopher, attack the rook. Con cosa attacca? Ngl, liches, liches. Hi. Liches. Questa mi sembra che è una mossa. Ho perso già tanto tempo adesso, ragazzi. Questa mi sembra che già si prende. Ok. Non lo so, non ho giocato forse bene, c'ha gli alfieri, ma mi arrangio io con lui, con i suoi alfieri. Oh, vuole attaccare, ok. Boh, non lo so come partire qua. Che bisogna fare qua? So che il mio cavallo non dovrebbe stare qua assolutamente, anche se mi rovina la mia struttura. Il mio cavallo deve essere pericoloso. Per questo gli do da mangiare al mio cavallo. Deve essere molto forte. Molto forte, ragazzi. cazzo. Non mi si vede bene il rating e il coso. Ho distrutto tutto con questo cazzo di Niemann. Di cacca di Niemann. Neyman. Alr. Ecco, adesso si vede meglio. E questa, aspetta, questa forse la metto un po' così, più giù, così si vede ancora più forte, più bello. Sì, ecco, eccola, combinato. Quindi, che mossa ha fatto questo? Ok, okidoki, okidoki. Tu comunque non puoi prendere quello. Adesso può prendere. Ma voglio dire, c'hai il coraggio da prendere. Questo è Rusacchiotto, avrà coraggio, sì. Se io metto qua, lui prende, io devo prendere, quindi non c'ho niente. Devo ritirare indietro. E attaccare con questa probabilmente. Ragazzi, mi fa perché ho 4 minuti, non c'ho più tempo, non c'ho più voglia, perché ho perso tanto e non mi va. Non sono forte come pensavo. Ecco, il mio pad da numeri, ovviamente. Basta, mi metto qua su modo avion. Ratatà, ratatà, ratatà. Il mio computer da numeri, in senso che il pad, no? Non funziona tanto per ouch. E questo russacchiato c'ha un stile molto forte. Molto forte. Gioca bene per il suo rating proprio.
This is a move you play in blitz and in rapid when you recognize that there's going to be some long-term practical problems here. Regardless of the evaluation, White is going to get in trouble in this game at some point on the king side. Mark our words. And that's why Magnus played d5. He's going for this sort of practical approach to the game to try to get Hans to blunder in the time scramble.
And if you gave black a dark square bishop, the game is over. Like White's
vinto
king is just being
Magnus.
hunted, and we see e4 played not with.
Ha vinto Magnus 2-0. C'ha l'alfiere G7. Però li prendo la torre. Non la trova sicuramente. Non so se riesce a trovare quella mossa. G7 è l'unica mossa che si può salvare. Non ha trovato la mossa. Penso che non ha trovato. È scaccomato. Se no perde la regina. Doveva trovare. E se va là, c'è il cavallo. O il cavallo. Ha perso di nuovo Rosacchiotto. Non pensavo io che lui potrebbe essere così forte. Ha perso Rosacchiotto. Ha perso. Ha perso Rosacchiotto. Ha perso perché non c'aveva. Vedi che è furbo. Non vuole più giocare. No, no, basta. Basta. No, non gioco più con lui. Ho 2-1. Basta, non gioco. Perché dovrei giocare con lui? Basta. Gioco con altro più debole. Guarda, 5-4. Ok, aveva questa mossa. Dopo questa mossa prendo. Ok. Lui va qua. Ok. Io attacco qui. Lui vuole venire qua. Io difendo. Lui va qua. Io vado di qua. Lui spinge. Io prendo. Boh, queste mosse da computer. Di cacca. Lui prende. Io li prendo. Lui va di qua. Io prendo questo. Lui prende questo. E io vado di qua. No, perché lui prende quello. Ah, ok, lo stesso è vincevole. Non c'aveva più nessuna possibilità di vincere. Quindi sono riuscito, ragazzi, a arrivare a 1890 passi. Basta. Gioco forse ancora una. Forse ancora una. Però prima acqua. Col mouse però. Vediamo. Vediamo cosa fa Nîmes.
Check, but discover check coming next if he didn't clog that diagonal. So f4 played. That's a loose pawn here. So Danny, you can't reinforce it with a
Chess speak for itself. Oh, vuole attaccare. Adesso con tutta la forza su questo pedone centrale, se riusciamo a vincere questo pedone, vinciamo tutta la partita. Non può andare con questo, arriva il cavallo. La perde? Sì, la perde. La perde il pedone. Perde il pedone centrale. Ancora no? Cosa minaccia lui? Niente. In aria minaccia. Scacco e torre. Vuole prendere la mia torre. Bellissima torre. E nel frattempo mi ha attaccato la... Ecco. Ok. Siamo quasi pari. Quindi... vuole venire di qua dopo. Ce la faccio. Ce la faccio, ce la faccio. Non ce la faccio. Oh, fuck. Fuck. Blunder di merda. Cum fu cu ăsta? Vai, lasă-o, drept. Pezzo. Ho perso.
Another, and it seems like we have a mistake.
It's a loose pawn, and right as you highlighted it, Hans says, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to let it be, but computer didn't like it. I don't know what the move is. Magnus plays knight f5, a solidifying move. Just show real quick, or highlight, if you take, the pawn takes, and then that e-pawn is protected, so that's a problem. And the knight is loose on e3. The tactics on the king side are going to come back to haunt Hans here.
And another thing, the knight protects the rook, so that knight takes c4 idea we were talking about no longer works. So he gets rid of the knight on f5. The g file is open. Don't be surprised if this knight moves out the way and a rook slides to g6 and there are problems facing that white king. I think this is turned around in a hurry. The evaluation bar clearly in black's favor, but even if I didn't see that, I just think that white's king...
Ah, ok, questo ha giocato con 93% accuracy, ma vaffanculo. Un altro Magnus Carlsen, vaffanculo. Qua, avrei dovuto fare... Ecco. E qui. ...96% precisi, 93%. Ma vaffanculo, manipolatore. Perché gioco io con tutti i 2 anni. Oh, I understand. I understand.
king is in some trouble, and black's king is safe and sound, and black's not even down any material.
Couldn't agree more. I feel bad, a commentator's curse here, because right as I was applauding Han's patience, king h2, and said, don't push pawns, they're the things you can't go back. He played f3, and now f4. You see what happens in these positions. These pawns wish they could just go back to f2 and put the king on g1. Those are the kind of moves you want to avoid in a seemingly equal position. Magnus is just like a tiger. He just waits to pounce on those moments, and the moment the pawn structure changed on the king side, Magnus changed the structure in the center.
And look at this, queen b6. That queen may land on f2. Knight to h5, rook to g6. This looks like a problem for Hans. None of these moves are going to be easy. And let's not forget there's a passed pawn just sitting here on e4 that you also have to look out for, because if you think you're just going to trade and it's going to be equal because we have the same material, not so fast. That pawn could be dangerous. And this pawn on d5, you need to use all of your resources to defend it. Your knight and rook are tethered to that pawn.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I'm sitting here to think of where are the tricks for white. How does Hans overwhelm the queen, perhaps? Because you got to do it while she still has to guard the rook, and you have that d5 pass pawn. Okay, knight a4 is a way to at least attack the queen, whether she's overwhelmed or not. I like that move, but again, objectively, computer says black should be better. The thing I actually dislike the most about Hans' position right now is that he lost his time advantage. The time scramble is coming, and his king is going to be weak in the end.
Yes, his king is the one that's going to be in trouble. We see a repetition of moves, but there's no way Magnus is going to make a draw. Queen b6 played. I think knight a4 will be met by queen to d8, just adding another attacker on this d5 pawn. And also, knight h5 is not out of the question in the near future. So Magnus, he's making Hans believe that there may be a draw on the table, but I do not think he's going to make it.
Yeah, and Hans knows better. Whether he repeats or not because he has no better options, he does. I think Hans knows that Magnus is not going to take a draw. As I said a few moments ago, I think a draw would actually be a fantastic result for Hans in game 2. Doesn't go to d8, goes to b8, but similarly, the queen gets out of the way, doesn't repeat, and now she spies the f4 pawn once again, Robert.
Also keeps the white queen honest in many positions. The b2 pawn, knight h5 is in the air. That looks quite frustrating to deal with. But I think what black is struggling with is that this pawn on d5 is such a nuisance. If this rook could jump over to the king side, then that pawn runs free, and that's a very close passer. So Magnus, he's better, but he also has his hands full.
No, I can sense the tone in your slight hesitation. He's better, but it's not as big of an advantage as it was. I'm just completing Robert's sandwich there. And I think, and you see, now it's close back to equal, right? So can Hans play d6 and get away with it? That's the question.
It's a very tempting move here. Both players do not have very much time, and it seems that Magnus under 20 seconds, and Hans similarly in some time trouble himself, but the d6 pawn isn't.
Knight on the rim, looking grim. So yeah, these are those double pawns. It's one of those moves you see, and at first you go, ooh, classical chess principles, and then you go, oh, modern chess understanding. Double pawns for the win.
And, well, we have double isolated pawns for both sides. So this is not a recommended pawn structure for either player. So for those of you watching, both at home and in the live audience, try not to do this yourself, because these pawns are hard to defend, particularly the lead pawn, because it's closer to enemy territory, which means it's more approachable by enemy pieces. So for example, black would love to get these two moves in and go after c4, but as we mentioned, there's an open file on the b line. That keeps the bishop tied down to b7. Rook coming to d1 would make a move like pawn d6. Well, now impossible. You can do it, but you just lose the pawn on the spot.
Magnus gives up the pawn on e2 for compensation. The problem really with Hans' position are those queenside pieces that are not playing, right? Your old school abusive chess coach would come over and just take them off the board and say, if you're not going to use them, I'm taking them, right? You'd say, that's toxic behavior. Don't treat me like that. But that's a different story. The point is, you got to get those pieces developed. They're not playing on a8 and c8, and that is a problem for Hans Niemann.
Well, he didn't take the pawn. He said brought his knight to c5. That knight wants to get into f5, hit the h6 pawn and that d6 square, and his bishop is buried right now. So d6, it opens up that line, stops the knight from getting to f5, but as we see Magnus quickly retreat his knight, it's to open up the d file. But Danny, you mentioned it, the e2 pawn still vulnerable. This is actually quite a dynamic position.
Yeah, and this is a big position too, I think. You have to calculate a lot. Do you go for forcing variations here? Take e2, you trade for d6. Who gets the better of that at the end? The rooks are getting active. The files are opening up. You deal with b3 first. Exactly, you're highlighting all of it. Ultimately, if you take on b3 as black, you open that rook on a1, and then a7 is a potential problem down the a file. So yeah, we get to highlight and have fun up here with everyone else. But these are the variations that Hans is going to be calculating here, which is why he's taken a moment to think, flexing that time advantage.
Important that he keeps that lead on the clock, because we've seen when he gets under the duress of time trouble, he is going to struggle against Magnus. And in this endgame, we see that Black's pawns look worse on the surface, but I do like this rook on e2. It's super active here. It could slide behind either the c3 or the b3 pawns over here, but you do need to watch out because rook d8 check next. If white got a free turn, that actually wins material. With bishop h3 to follow, you got pile up pressure on pin pieces.
Yeah, and so Hans says, I'm not going to have any of that. I will develop. Hans plays bishop e6. Magnus immediately responds with b4. He's saying, I don't care about that c4 pawn. What's the compensation here? He wants rook d7, I guess, and it's just that. It's that simple and subtle, but sometimes Magnus makes chess look easy.
He does. He's just trying to gain control of a key square. Also, the f6 pawn is hanging behind the bishop, so he could go in that direction as well. Bishop takes c4. Bishop f1 is tempting. It won't work out, so that's why we see rook e8 give up a7. Danny, I mean, different pawns are hanging. It's hard to actually know what's what here, but there is some trouble for the white king, and that's why that rook stays parked on the first rank.
Yeah, you have to be careful. This is probably objectively should be a draw, and probably all the queenside pawns should come off for each other. And if that happens, maybe Magnus is happy, because at least then Black's pawn structure is slightly weaker, right? Those doubled F pawns and weak H6 pawn, but isn't enough to win. That would be the question. But here we go. Magnus plays rook takes a7. We're going to get forcing lines. Does Hans have rook c1? That could get scary for Magnus. Yeah, here comes the checkmate.
I see what you want over there. And actually, we should pull up an analysis board because it's a very tricky line. If you think it's just about a pin on the first rank, it's not just that. Rook takes f1, king takes f1 to make that quick move. Bishop h3 check. The king moves out the way, and then rook e1 would be a checkmate. So be very careful about these sequences. But the key for white is that if rook takes f1, I think there's rook takes e6. You're trying to checkmate me on the light squares. I'm going to remove your greatest attacker, and you see that the engine favors white because the endgame is nice. The b7 pawn will fall after both those rooks come off the board.
Move, king, get out the way. Checkmate for Hans. He would love that. Hoping to get his first win here. I'm gonna be honest or be a little personally biased. I'm hoping for Hans to get his first win. I want to see it. I want to see Hans strike here and get a dub. But I don't think Magnus blunders into those types of tactics. And now Hans is getting under 30 seconds, which makes you even more nervous because very few enter these types of situations against Magnus Carlsen and come out alive to talk about it.
Yeah, he probably is looking at the c3 pawn, which can be captured, but then white plays c5, and suddenly there's a clamp down the queen side. That b7 pawn cemented in place. It's a target. Look at the clock. Hans suddenly in huge time trouble.
Yeah, and ultimately plays a move you don't want to see with bishop c8. It's a passive move. Magnus could come back to d1 and take care of problems, but then c3 falls. Again, objectively, we're looking at a very equal position. I guess, the evaluation bar, the opinion of the computer reveals as much. But you know that Magnus is going to do the thing he does to just pose problems.
Oh, wait. No, now it works.
Now it works.
Yes, because there is no rook sacrifice on e6, and Hans is having a problem here. I'm not sure what, but something has gone wrong.
I have no idea what's going on. He plays rook c1, king to g2. He takes f1, and he's just winning.
Yes.
Magnus shakes his head. He's just blundered.
He did, and that's what bishop c8 was so brilliant, because he gets out the way from a counter sacrifice. That rook needed to take the bishop in the other variation, and now we see a position where white actually has 3 pawns for a bishop. That seems to be an equivalent point value, but it's not just about the materials with king safety. It's about how players can proceed from here, and it's those light squares that are a devastating problem for white.
Devastating problems on the clock. If Hans doesn't focus, he's complaining about something. The arbiter is watching. We also have a camera on the board. We can confirm in real time everything the players see and how it aligns exactly with the server. So if Hans Niemann is trying to play the Vladimir Kramnik gambit here, it's not going to work. There are no situations where the clock is not under thorough review. I'm not sure what he was complaining about there, but it looked like he was saying that my clock was jumping.
Well, they're definitely going to review it afterwards. We have cameras behind the players, as we've seen. So if there is something that needs to be reviewed, of course it will be reviewed. I mean, that's just fair play for all. And in this position, I mean, we still do have 3 pawns extra for white, extra bishop for black. That material dynamic, it's important, but even more important, the utmost importance is king safety, and that white king is in huge trouble.
Yeah, and the bishop comes to e6. The white king is in huge trouble. Hans Niemann should get his first win here. He's close, but Magnus Carlsen is not going to lie down. Here come the double rooks, though. And Hans, by the way, finds this with just a couple seconds, which is brilliant chess. Will he get enough here? Doesn't want to settle on the draw. Okay, he couldn't take c4. Yes, because of rook takes c4.
He's just going after the white king. Or you could take b7, but then you get checkmated on the first rank. One of these rooks is going to do the damage. So you see a
Fuck
resignation,
And
and that's
just
Hans'
like
first
that,
win.
Hans
Fuck
Niemann
you.
gets his first
Fuck
win
you.
of the
Fuck
match.
You motherfucker.
He's complaining about something. We're going to figure that out. We've got cameras on the board. We will be able to confirm anything like we said.
Fuck you.
And to be sure, we will obviously we will
Mamma mia,
also be able
geniale.
to align what happened on the
Geniale,
screen
cazzarola.
with the server there. So Magnus kind of waiting to see what's
Era a
going
un
on.
certo punto che
And
perdita.
I think we will pause the
Tra-
clock to allow
Qui,
game ops and
guardate
the
com'era
arbiters
qua.
to review.
Aspetta.
I am not
No. Era sempre vincente.
necessarily
Solo...
worried that we won't have the information,
Qui.
but Hans is definitely worried
Pensa.
that something's going on here, Robert.
Yeah, and it's, I think, the
Mamma
players'
mia,
rights to
che
see if there has
vincita,
been an issue.
ragazzi.
There is video to review, so everyone can take a look at that, and the team is going to work hard and look into it. But I think that actually is an uncomfortable moment for the players. I mean, you see that it's now a 2-point spread once again, so Hans gets a much-needed victory, and now we may get a pause in the match, and
1900.
who does that impact more?
Well, just you mentioned a pause in the match. We should confirm for all the fans. The match clock is paused. There is no time ticking while we resolve this, so it will not affect anything. And Hans Niemann, maybe a good moment for him to pause too. He did just get his first win, so if we're just talking about the match real quick and we assume the drama.
No, no, no. Mm. Ah, qui ho fatto l'errore e il computer mi dice che ero perso. Se trovavo questa mossa ero fallito. Era matto. Perché? Super. Super buper. Ah, gli ho dato. Vediamo se ho 1900. Ho 1900 giusto, giusto. Mhm. Ciao Datcoin. Drago, dov'è? Mhm. Ma- Dead coin. Non ha visto la mossa interessante. Pedro. Ma chi ti attacca? Chi ti attacca? Cos'è? Oh! Easy win. Boh, che mossa. Intanto facciamo questo. Pedro. Oh. Oh. Ma questa già mi fa incazzare questo qua. Mm. Mm. Allora, questa. Facciamolo questa mossa, facciamo. Perché attacchiamo due pezzi e lui può difendere ovviamente, ma non è super facile. Qui devi andare, ti prego. Oh, oh. Oh my. Ratata, ratata. Rarararararara. E adesso dove vai? Dove vai? Vai. Vai. E sei fottuto caro mio. Oh, oh. È brutto giocare con uno di 2000 e tu sei 1600. Adesso li faccio scaccomato tra poche mosse, ok? Quindi 1, 2. Scherzo, non li faccio scaccomato. È troppo bravo questo ragazzo. Mm. Mhm. No, che è bravo. Boh, va bene, scherzavo, li faccio. Li faccio tra due mosse, tra una. Ve le faccio adesso. Mhm. Sì. Oh! Pensate che abbia capito qualcosa? Vuole giocare ancora. Ma cosa vuoi fare? Ma cosa vuoi giocare? Pedro. Ho vinto ragazzoli. Magnus. Ho vinto. Yuhuhu. Basta per oggi, non gioco più con questa. Ormai cosa vuoi giocare? Sono rifatto il rating. No, mi interessa. Analisi, niente. Vado a dormire.